What's going on, everybody? Stat Sheet Sports here with Chicago Sports Network, and today we're doing our Clemson schedule breakdown. We did one last year, and then we'll have a Notre Dame one coming out as well. But before we get started, make sure you like and subscribe. Check out the description below where you can get links to my website, my podcast, and all that stuff. And check out his channel as well, Chicago Sports Network. Make sure you like and subscribe to him as well, and check out his description. I'm sure he'll have all his links down there as well.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and get started. So Clemson last year, 10-3, 6-2 in the ACC, won their bowl game against Iowa State, 20-13. The offense was not great last year, very inconsistent. The defense, despite all the injuries, was very good. And they start out the season this year technically at Georgia Tech. Technically not at Georgia Tech, but it's a home game for Georgia Tech in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. So what are your thoughts on that game? What are the...
It makes it interesting because it is a national broadcast. Since it is a national broadcast, that means everybody's watching the game. It's on Labor Day, I think. That's September 5th.
Yeah.
And the same way that Notre Dame played Louisville a couple of years ago in 2019, that became an important game in which Notre Dame struggled at the beginning of it, and it kind of defined their season. Until later on when they played Georgia and Michigan, because that was the game that was on national television. So this is an important game. Yes, it is against Georgia Tech, and most likely you will win this game, but it is important as a defining game that it's going to be on national television. Most people are going to be watching it since it's week 1 of college football, and there still isn't any NFL yet.
And it's the only game on.
So I think that this is a tone setter that you have to be able to come out, and this is going to be a big game for DJ because DJ doesn't get a test defensively until NC State maybe, because I don't know if I really say Wake Forest is any good defensively, but I don't know. It is a tone setting game. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. I want to see DJ come out. I don't think Georgia Tech's offense is going to be able to do anything really. They don't have the big guy Jahmyr Gibbs anymore. We really don't know what's going to go on with their quarterback situation. So I think Clemson's defense is not going to be a problem. Only thing I'm looking for is the offense to see what DJ does. I would expect Klubnik to get some playing time in this game, whether that's because Clemson is blowing them out or DJ isn't playing well, or just Dabo wants to get him some game reps in there. And he's definitely going to get some time against Furman and Louisiana Tech later on. But, yeah, I think this is, like you said, a defining game. You need to come out and make a statement early on. Not play like you did last year. The offensive line needs to play well. I want to see the receivers do some stuff better than they did last year. Block for the screen game, get open downfield, fight for 50-50 balls. I think Joseph Ngata and Bo Collins are going to be really, really good this year.
So you mentioned this point just previously, but let's talk about the offensive line a little bit. Massive struggle last year. Probably the biggest reason for your offensive struggles in general. What do you think that this offensive line is going to do? You didn't really lose too much, but you also aren't bringing back the most fantastic of players, or at least according to what happened last season. How do you think this offensive line is going to be able to improve, and if so, how much?
I think the offensive line will improve. You have obviously some more experience in there. Marcus Tate started as a true freshman last year, so I think he will improve. I think Jordan McFadden, he didn't play well last year, but I think he'll get back to that all-ACC first-team type level that he was playing on in 2020. 2020.
It was second team, but
second. Yeah.
I'm looking down at.
Notes. So he was second team then, but his potential, he could be first team all-ACC. I think that's what he will be this year. And then Walker Parks and Will Putnam, they get some more experience. I think the main thing that killed this offensive line last year is you didn't really have a center going into last year. No player. It was kind of split reps between centers. So I think now that you have a little more, everybody knows where they're going to be at in this offensive line, I think that's going to help a lot too. And then you still have some good guys on the bench as well. Tristan Lay, with Jordan McFadden coming back, he's still, so you have some better depth this year as well. As he got a lot of playing time last year, so I think the offensive line is going to improve. I don't know how much, but I do expect them to be better.
I will say this: you don't have a test particularly against your offensive line, other than maybe NC State, Florida State. Notre Dame will definitely be a test with Foskey and all of that. But Miami will probably be a test.
I think those
South
two are
Carolina
really
will be a test.
I think those two are really the only two teams that I think will really test this offensive line. South Carolina maybe, but it's just going to depend on how some of their guys develop over the course of the year.
They definitely have high-level recruits. They got that guy out of TL Hanna.
Yeah.
It's a high school near us that he was like the third or fourth recruit in the entire nation. And, he went to South Carolina, but he hasn't done anything. So we'll see if he can do something. So let's see here. You talked a little bit about wide receivers. What do you think is going to be coming out of your wide receiver production? Last year, it was pretty pitiful. A lot of drops, a lot of bad route running, a lot of... it wasn't just their fault. DJ wasn't hitting the passes he needed to.
But when he
would, they would drop the ball. They would lose concentration. They wouldn't read DJ where I don't know whether it was the wide receiver's fault particularly sometimes or whether it was DJ's fault on where ball placement should have been, whether it should be on the outside shoulder or the inside shoulder.
There was just a lot of miscommunication between the quarterback and the receivers last year. And they also... Clemson just didn't really have a guy until later in the season like they've had in the past, a guy like a Mike Williams or somebody that will just go up and win you those 50-50 balls, a T. Higgins. But I think Bo Collins really emerged as that later on in the season. I expect a huge year from him. And Joseph Ngata, if he can stay healthy, he had a great season last year when you look at how many catches he had to how many yards. He averaged 19 yards a catch. So that's pretty good. So if he can stay healthy, if DJ can get him the ball, I expect Ngata and Bo Collins to really play well. And then the one thing the Clemson offense was missing, especially last year, that they've always kind of had under Dabo, is a pure slot receiver, a guy like Adam Humphries, Hunter Renfrow, Amari Rogers, Artavis Scott. We see that this year as they get Brandon Spector back. He got COVID last season or in camp, and he never really recovered from that. He had some other injuries, so he never really got on the field and played. But I expect him to play really well this year and kind of give that piece back to the Clemson offense, as well as potentially a guy like E.J. Williams or Will Taylor coming in that spot. As I think Will Taylor will be a gadget piece that Dabo will use often this year if he's able to stay healthy.
So here, why don't we go through the schedule now? But one thing that I want to point out here that I find very interesting is that the average conference game for Clemson, like the average score in a conference game, was 25-20. Clemson being the 25 and the opponent being the 20. The offense is not the problem. 20 points defensively, I think that you could get that down to like 17 this year, maybe 16 or something. But really, it's offensively, you need to get more into the 30s or something like that, especially against ACC opponents. And with all the quarterback play like that in the ACC with Sam Hartman or Devin Leary or whoever else, Phil Jakovic or wherever you want to go with that. So Georgia Tech, what is your defining point in that game, and who do you have as the victor?
I think Clemson's going to win, and I think the defining point is going to be how DJ plays. I think he's going to come out strong. I think he'll come out not necessarily looking like he did against Boston College and Notre Dame in 2020, but I think he will come out and have a good performance, and I think Clemson will win.
I have Clemson winning this game, but I think it really comes down to their running attack. I think that Will Shipley and Kobe Pace and Phil Maffa, they have to be able to fill that void because at the moment, DJ's got to show me something at some point before I can trust him in order to win a game like that.
Yeah.
I don't think that they're going to win it off his back, but I do think that I think that most likely it's going to be the running attack that wins it. But the thing I will be looking for is, can DJ hit the short and intermediate passes with touch?
Oh, yeah, he
has
was
to be
good
able-
on the deep passes last year. It was those passes within 10 yards that he just could not hit.
Yeah, he has to put the right touch on the ball. It can't be 100 miles an hour every time. Sometimes it has to be a little bit less on the ball, so that way you throw the ball before the wide receiver even breaks. You have to throw with anticipation. That's something that you have to learn with experience, and maybe DJ's able to do that this year. We'll see. Furman, really tough game on your schedule here.
Yeah. I expect this game to be over by the end of the first quarter, if not sooner than that. I expect Clemson to have no problem winning this game. What I would be looking for in this game is, once again, just see DJ get some rhythm and hit some good passes. And I don't think Clemson will have any problem stopping Furman. I mean, they'll score a touchdown max, at least on offense. Now, if something happens on defense and they get a pick six or something, then they may score more than that. But I just don't see them doing very much on offense against the Clemson defense, who I personally think is probably going to be the best defense in the country.
I agree. I agree with both the defensive point and that Clemson will win that game. Louisiana Tech.
That is an interesting game because I don't think Clemson has played them under Dabo. If they have, it was one time at the most. I don't really know a whole lot about Louisiana Tech, but once again, I don't think it's going to be a very hard matchup. Particularly, their defense may give the Clemson offense a little bit of a struggle, at least in the passing game. I don't think they're going to be able to stop the run game with the double punch of Will Shipley and Kobe Pace. I think that is going to be one of the best running back. I think Clemson has a top 3 running back room in the country, I would say, with Kobe Pace and Will Shipley. Will Shipley's a top 10 running back in the country, and Kobe Pace could probably start at most schools in the country. So I think that the running game is going to do really well in this one, but like I keep pointing out, I want to see DJ get in rhythm. But also in Furman in this Louisiana Tech game, I want to see Cade Klubnik get some play and see him make some good throws and perform pretty well as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say this. I don't think that there should be any issues for Clemson in this game. I'm trying to find Louisiana Tech. Yeah, you got it. Did they fire their coach last year? Was that it?
Yes, and they went 3-9 last season. They did lose at Mississippi State 35-34 week 1. They don't really return. They return 8 starters on defense, 6 on offense, but they lose their quarterback, they lose their running back, and they lose a good chunk of their secondary on defense. All their losses come from the secondary. So I don't expect Clemson to have a problem with Louisiana Tech. My Athlon book has them projected to go 4-8, so not a very good team. Obviously, I don't think Clemson will have any problem winning this game.
Mm-hmm. I agree there. Moving on to at Wake Forest. Now this one's going to be an interesting game. Let's hear your thoughts, and then I will probably give a little bit of a rebuttal to your thoughts. Probably.
So Wake Forest, they're going to have an outstanding offense this year. Let me flip to them real quick. They return, I believe, like both of their 1,000-yard receivers from last year. No, they lose Jaquari Robinson, but they do bring back A.T. Perry, who was their guy with 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. And they return Sam Hartman, 9 starters on offense, 6 starters on defense. I think this is going to be – I don't think it's going to be like it was last year when Clemson won 48-27, but I do think Clemson will win by, I would say, about 10 points. Wake Forest defense, particularly in the run game, is so bad. They're terrible at tackling. Every single one of them. All they do is force fumbles. That's about all the defense does. And so I expect Clemson to win this game by about 10 points. I expect Shipley and Pace to have a great game on the run. But what I could see Wake Forest winning this game is if DJ is just giving the game away. I need him to be smart with the ball. Not necessarily throw for 300 yards to win the game, but he probably needs to throw for about 250 and protect the football is the main key there.
Well, here's the thing I would say. Also, with the top 3 running back room, they're not a top 3 running back room. I would give it to Texas, Ohio State, and Wisconsin before that. I'm looking at Phil Steele here, and he has them down at 11, which I could see, but he also has like Central Michigan and Appalachian State and Air Force ahead.
Yeah.
So I don't know that much about their running backs room, so I can't really say. But to turn to Wake Forest, here's my thing. Last year I said Clemson would lose one game and it would be against NC State. I thought it would be NC State, but I said it could either be NC State or Wake Forest. It ended up being right with NC State. They also lost the Georgia game, which I didn't think they would lose.
And at Pittsburgh.
And at Pittsburgh, yes. And basically with this game, it comes down to this. Wake Forest defense sucks. It's terrible.
One of the worst units in the ACC overall, counting the Coastal too.
But here's the thing. Because the way that Sam Hartman drops back, he only takes about a step or two, so he's generally only about 3 or 4 yards back rather than 6 or 7. So that means that more of the pressure is going to be on the interior defense to get pressure, not the exterior, because you're going to have to move around farther in order to get to him. That's why he steps up like that, is because it makes it harder for guys like Miles Murphy or stuff like that to get at him, but that it means that Brian Bursey is going to have a game. If he can get at him, which Wake Forest also had a terrible offensive line last year.
And you saw that in the Clemson game when they had like 8 sacks, I think it was, in that game.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. It comes down to a couple of things that I will say is this. Let me see. Phil Steele thinks Wake Forest's offensive line is going to be good this year, 3rd in the ACC. Yeah. But here's the thing I will say is this. It comes down to this main point. Can Clemson keep up with Wake Forest's offense, or can Clemson's defense slow down Wake Forest enough? I don't know whether that is true, and I am going to say this. Once again, I think Clemson loses to either NC State or Wake Forest. I think they lose one of those games. I can't really say because I like NC State better than Wake Forest, but the Wake Forest game is on the road and the NC State game is on at home for Clemson, so it makes that decision tougher. I think that they lose one of the two, especially with them being back-to-back. If I had to pick one, I would probably give the advantage to Wake Forest because they lost to Clemson last year, and Davo's not going to be happy that he lost to NC State. But we'll see. I think that you probably have a loss here. Moving on to NC State.
I think this is going to be an interesting one. A fact about Wake Forest, Dabo's 13-0 in his career against them. He's never lost to them. And until last year, he had never lost to Dave Doran either. And I think he's going to continue to beating on Dave Doran. That game's in Death Valley. I definitely think the one that they're most likely to lose between the two is definitely at Wake Forest. Now, Wake Forest doesn't have a great home field advantage, but you're not in Death Valley. You're still on the road at Wake Forest. I think Clemson fans will show up pretty well, but I still don't think it's not going to be the same as having to come to Clemson. So I don't think NC State is gonna really fare well. Now they do return a big guy as well, in Devin Carter, the receiver for them. Let me flip to him. Last year, he had 31 catches for 556 yards, 6 touchdowns. He's a big guy. And they also returned Thayer Thomas, 51 catches, 596 yards, and 8 touchdowns. So I think it's definitely going to be tough. The NC State defense returns 10 starters as well. So we'll see. The defense was pretty good in the ACC and overall in the country. 2nd in scoring defense, 3rd in rushing defense, 3rd in passing defense, 3rd in total defense in the ACC last year. So that'll be a tough defense, but they lose their running backs, both of them, Bam Knight and Ricky Person. And they lose Emeka Emezi, who was the guy that really killed Clemson last year, was Emezi. He was just so much bigger than Andrew Booth. But I expect Clemson's corners and safeties, I do think they will struggle a little bit against these receivers. Yes. But not too much with guys getting more experience like Nate Wiggins and Jalen Phillips and Andrew Makuba at safety. I think those guys with more, because Andrew Makuba was a true freshman starting last year at safety. So I think that he will be definitely more experienced and a lot better this year, and I think he'll help in the pass game as well.
So I already said my thoughts basically for this game. I think that NC State is a good team. It's going to be tough to go win in Death Valley. It's not impossible. It's happened. Pitt beat them. They almost lost to Syracuse, so it's not impossible. I would say it would be much better if it was a day game and not a night game, because if it's a night game, it's going to be a lot tougher. But I would also say this. I think that NC State has a good defense. They always have under Dave Doran. The problem is they continue to struggle against Clemson generally, so I don't know whether I fully trust them, but Devin Leary's a good quarterback. They have a good defense. Their offensive line is pretty solid. They have good wide receivers. So it is definitely a mixture for an NC State victory possibly. But like I said, I think they win one and lose one of the NC State Wake Forest games. So I give them a win here since I gave them a loss against Wake Forest.
And I think, too, if they stay healthy, last year they lost in double overtime. Or no, overtime. 27-21. They lose by 6. But if you remember in that game, Will Shipley and Brian Brzee both went down early on in that game. So I think if they stay healthy, that they definitely have a good shot at winning this game. I mean, they lost by 6 last year without those two guys and on the road. So I think you put it at home, those two guys are healthy as well as the rest of the team. You're more experienced. I think this is definitely, I definitely give this one to Clemson.
So, heading on to the road to Chester Hill in Massachusetts against Boston College. This should be an interesting matchup, but I think it is pretty straightforward.
I do too. I think Boston College's offense could give Clemson a little bit of trouble early on with Zay Flowers and Phil Dracovic, but I don't think that they're going to push Clemson much. And I expect Clemson to win 10 to 20 anywhere between 10 to 20 point range.
It's on the road.
It is.
And that is about the only thing Boston College has an advantage in. Clemson's defense, I think, is so much better in order to shut this down. And I'm not a super big believer in Jeff Hafley. Maybe he'll prove me wrong this year. He competed well in 2020, but the problem is he kind of struggled last year. He didn't really show development. Maybe he'll have a bounce back year after a sophomore slump. But we'll see. Boston College has almost beaten Clemson both times that they've been under Jeff Hafley. Mm-hmm. They lost both barely, just absolutely barely. And both games were at Clemson, right?
Yeah.
So maybe this one being at home makes it a possible Boston College victory. But
only problem I see for BC too is last year they had an outstanding offensive line. This year they returned one starter on the offensive line, and they'll start a freshman at center and a sophomore at right tackle. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he'll be going up against Miles Murphy and Xavier Thomas, and then the center has to deal with Tyler Davis and Brian Brzee, as well as guys like Trenton Simpson and Levonta Bentley coming through the middle. So I think it's going to be difficult for them. Not to mention Clemson's defensive line also has Ruka Roro and KJ Henry as well. So they are stacked defensively on the D-line especially. So I think that it could be a close game for a little bit, but I think that eventually Clemson's going to pull away and win, like I said, anywhere from 10 to 20 points.
Now, this is an interesting matchup. If Clemson is undefeated at this point, it is a definite trap game. At Florida State, this is a tough one. This is at the Doak. It's a tough environment to go play in. The problem is I have no idea how good Florida State could be. It all relies on the quarterback position, really.
Yeah. With Jordan Travis, how he plays.
If he plays well, then Florida State could be competitive. But if he doesn't, which is more than likely, then you could see another fired Florida State head coach before he even gets a chance.
Yeah.
So I think that Clemson wins this game here, but don't be surprised if it is competitive.
I agree. I think Clemson wins. I think it will be competitive for three and a half quarters. But like I said with Boston College, I think they'll pull away quicker in the Boston College game. But I think it could be close down to the end. against Florida State.
Especially if DJ is continuing to struggle.
Yeah.
The offense is bad.
Yeah.
It could
Now,
definitely.
I will say last year, Florida State gave up 30 points to Clemson offense that wasn't very good. Well,
to be
23 because they got a scoop and score on the last play of the game for a touchdown.
And then that made people so mad because wasn't there somebody that bet like $10,000
something like that?
game?
Yeah, on the spread.
And bet for Florida State, and it was a -4 or something.
4.5, I think.
4.5. So basically, if they didn't get the scoop and score at the end, he wins. But since they did, it was a loss. So let's see here. Next game, Syracuse.
I don't think this is going to be much of a game. It's at Clemson. I mean, all you really got to do is stop Sean Tucker.
Though that's not an easy task to do.
Not an easy task, but it will be easier than it was last year with a healthy defensive line. And I just don't see Syracuse being very good.
I don't see them very good either, but I think that maybe Syracuse, they tend to keep it competitive with Clemson, so maybe a quarter or two in, it's still competitive. Maybe in the third, it's competitive until the end, but that's more just because they have a recent history of keeping it competitive. Yeah. But I think that, what's his name, the Syracuse coach? Dino Babers' time is coming to an end. So.
I agree. We'll skip this next game, and then we'll go to Louisville November 12th.
This is another interesting game with Malik Cunningham and Scott Satterfield.
It is. Louisville offense returned 7 starters. They don't return any of their starting receivers, really, but they do return their tight end, Marshawn Ford, who led them in receiving last year. Malik Cunningham's the big one that came back, though. Rushed for over 1,000 yards, threw for almost 3,000. I think this will be a high-scoring, highly competitive. Well, when I say high-scoring, I mean like I could see Louisville scoring 30 points or so. Not one of these games where it gets up to the 40s and 50s. But I still think Clemson is the better team in this one. I think their defense is going to win the game for them in this one, especially. And Louisville doesn't have a great defense, particularly against the run. So I do think that the running back and the run game is going to have a very good game in this one.
These final 4 weeks of Clemson's schedule are pretty underratedly difficult.
Yeah.
Notre Dame, Louisville, Miami, and South Carolina. The problem is you get the toughest game on the road.
Yeah.
So,
but you do come off a bye week for that one.
Yeah. And Notre Dame basically comes off a bye week. They play UNLV at home.
Yeah.
So basically, I think that I think it's a win for Clemson because I don't see anything that points to a Louisville win. But if DJ struggles and it's still unsure, like there's a lot of things that if DJ still struggles and Cade isn't ready, this could be an 8 or 7 win team just because the ACC is actually competitive this year.
I think they'll win more than 8 games just with the defense. The defense is so good that they'll.
But if you lose, what I'm saying is, if you lose to Wake Forest, lose to NC State, lose to Notre Dame, and then lose a 4th game somewhere, like to Miami or Louisville or at Florida State or something like that, that's if DJ continue to struggle the same way he did last year. I don't know whether he does. That's why I'm kind of split in the middle here. So. On to the next game, Miami, new coach, Mario Cristobal. What do you think about that?
Miami has a good team, but I just don't think they're going to be – I don't think they're going to be that much improved in week 1. I mean, it's not week 1, in year 1 under Cristobal. I do think the offensive line is going to be better than it was last year under him, year 1, but not much improvement. Miami's defense still isn't very good. They do have the good quarterback Van Dyke, but I expect Clemson to win this game, but I expect this to be a fun matchup and a close game.
I think it's going to be a fun matchup, and if DJ is struggling and Miami is improving and Van Dyke is as good as some people think he is, because somebody out there are people that think he's a dark horse Heisman guy or the next big thing at Miami. I wouldn't go that far with it. Like, they haven't shown me anything. They played a couple games as a freshman. It wasn't like they were that fantastic. But basically, if everything goes in Miami's favor, this is going to be a difficult game, but I could see them getting a victory. But with it being at Clemson, I think that makes it tougher.
Yeah.
Miami has the talent to beat Clemson. There's no worry about that. They definitely have talented players, but I don't think they do. Heading on to the final game of the season, but not the final game of this preview, home game against the Carolina Gamecocks.
I think that is going to be an interesting matchup. They have Spencer Rattler and Austin Stogner, the new guys coming in. They did some interesting stuff with Jaheim Bell in the bowl game against North Carolina last year. So I think that this is definitely going to be closer than 30-0, but I think a rivalry game in Clemson. I think Clemson's going to win this game. I think it'll be closer than last year, but I don't know if it's going to be that much closer. I still think it's about a 10-point win for Clemson, if not more.
I definitely could see that. I think that South Carolina's defensive line can be very good with Jordan Birch and Zach Pickens and Jordan Strahan. I could see that you have a good defensive line, so that is definitely possible that it is competitive. But I don't know how much I trust their offense to put points on the board, and I think that that's where the issue is.
Yeah.
I give the win to Clemson, but again, if DJ struggles, maybe it's a competitive game. This all goes back to if DJ turns into a great quarterback, not a good quarterback. He doesn't even have to be great.
Yeah.
Just a good quarterback. But
Not
if
even
he
a
turns
good
into
quarterback, just
Kelly,
a smart quarterback.
if he turns into Kelly Bryant, which is what he could, then Clemson's going to be in a place of major struggle. If
he turns into Kelly Bryant, then Clemson's going to be good. Kelly Bryant took Clemson to the playoff.
Yeah, but that was also against a much weaker ACC schedule.
That doesn't matter. Kelly Bryant was a good quarterback.
He struggled a lot with hitting passes.
You didn't watch him. Kelly Bryant in the year that he started, he was much better than DJ was last year. Much better.
I'm not saying that they are on an equal playing field that DJ was last year. I'm just saying. Either way, let's move on to our final game of the preview, and I'm sure we will talk about this for a couple minutes, but we're not going to talk about it as much as we could because it will take quite some time.
Yeah.
At Notre Dame, I will have Notre Dame winning this. He'll have Clemson winning this. I'm a Notre Dame fan. He's a Clemson fan. Why don't you give your 3 reasons or 3 points, and we'll just wrap it up like this.
So, I think Clemson's going to win this game. It'll be interesting to see DJ going back to South Bend after losing the heartbreaker in 2020 when he was up there starting while Trevor was out due to COVID. But I think that Clemson's going to win this game. I think the run game is going to be really good, and I think that Notre Dame is going to have a little bit of trouble guarding Joseph Ngata and Bo Collins. But at this point in the year, I think all the kinks will be worked out. And Clemson comes off the bye week. I know Notre Dame plays UNLV the week before, but you still don't have 2 weeks to prepare for a team and a week to rest as well. You still have to play a game. You're not going to sit all your starters. I wouldn't think so.
Maybe by the second quarter, though.
Yeah, maybe by the second quarter. But still, you won't have that whole week to prepare. You won't have the whole 2 weeks to prepare for Clemson.
To be fair, there are some advantages in not having a bye week where, like Michigan in 2019 when Notre Dame played them, they came off a bye week against Michigan, and Michigan just played Penn State the previous week, and Notre Dame struggled because they just weren't prepared because they came off a bye week, and it can be a good thing or a bad thing. It all depends on the coach mentality and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I think Clemson's receivers are going to be great. And also at the same time, I don't think Notre Dame's offense is going to have much going against the Clemson defense. Yes, Buckner is good in the run game. He hasn't shown anything really in the passing game. He didn't throw the ball particularly well last year. And so I think with guys at linebacker like Trenton Simpson and Jeremiah Trotter, I think that'll help limit his running ability and just all the athletic defensive linemen that Clemson has. I don't think that it's going to be a good day for Notre Dame offensively, particularly in the run game.
So is that all your points then, just to make
Yeah.
sure? So here's the thing. Both quarterbacks are basically completely unproven. Basically. DJ's a little bit more proven that he struggled last year, and Buckner kind of played last year, but not really. It's a new regime for Notre Dame. It's a game at Notre Dame. it is starting to turn into a rivalry with how many times we've been playing.
Yeah.
Both teams had their wins, their emotional highs, and their emotional lows. And you play a couple of times, so we'll see where this goes. But basically, I would say this. I think that Notre Dame defensively is not just as good as Clemson, but I think that their secondary is better than Clemson. I know you're going to disagree with that most likely, but
no, I think it's slightly better than Clemson secondary
just because of experience.
Yeah,
Brandon
just
Joseph,
off of
Clarence Lewis, Cam Hart.
I think by this point in the year, Clemson secondary could be even with.
It could be,
Notre
but
Dame.
that's projection.
But looking at it
so
right now, I
not...
think Notre Dame's secondary is a little bit better.
And then defensive line, I give the edge to Clemson, but it isn't like Notre Dame's defensive line is any slouch either with Isaiah Foskey and Jason Adamiola and stuff like. You have a good defensive line, so both. Neither one, the Clemson secondary or Notre Dame's defensive line, are slouches in any way. So I think defensively is not where it matters. I think both defenses are incredibly good, and I think Clemson's is a little bit better, but we'll see. It completely depends on how good is Al Golden at defensive play calling? Is Marcus Freeman, how involved is he? And that there is all sorts of questions there in and of itself. So throw the defenses out because I don't think that matters in this game because I think they're both pretty much elite. Offensively, this is where it matters. Wide receiver-wise, I think that it's a toss-up because Notre Dame, you had Lorenzo Styles, who played great in the bowl game and probably looks like the highest potential looks like a Bo Collins compared to Clemson because of that, but it was one game still.
Yeah.
He did have another good game against USC where he had over 100 yards and 5 catches, but again, it's a small sample size. Notre Dame does have a good wide receiver group. I would say it's a little bit better than Clemson's, but it is also extremely thin. If Notre Dame has injuries at this point, they could be in big trouble. Running back wise, Clemson's is a little bit more proven, a little bit. Notre Dame definitely has running backs and Logan Diggs and Audrey Estime, and not to mention Chris Tyree. Chris Tyree, I think, is a breakout candidate for this year because of the drop foot he suffered last year, so I think that could be important. But basically, the point that I'm getting at is Notre Dame's offensive line is a lot better than Clemson's offensive line is because of the tackles and because of Jared Patterson. And Notre Dame brings back that whole offensive line. So as I was talking about, I think that this game comes down to one thing and one thing alone. It comes down to quarterback play. That's all it comes down to.
I agree.
And, well, I really can't give a definitive argument on that. My gut would say Notre Dame, but to be completely honest, it's more of just kind of a gut feeling than anything else. So that's basically it. So closing thoughts?
I think it comes down to quarterback play and kind of a side note from the quarterback play, turnovers. I think that's what it comes down to. If the quarterbacks, even if one is outplaying the other one, but that team is fumbling the ball and stuff, then I think that
if Travis Etienne decides to give us the ball again, that would be nice. Just hand it to Isaiah Foskey and he'll run it right in for a touchdown. Don't worry.
I think that's what it's going to be. Quarterback play will be the biggest factor, but turnovers could turn into the biggest factor depending on what happens with that. But yeah.
Well, that's basically what it turned into last game at Notre Dame when Ian Book threw that interception.
Fumbled in the end zone.
Travis Etienne had the fumble, and it came down to that. It didn't really come down to that, but that was such a crucial part that if Notre Dame did lose, it would have been pointed towards Ian Book fumbling that ball.
Yeah. Well, I had Clemson finishing up at 12-0. You had them at 10-2.
10-2.
Well, that pretty much wraps today's video up. Make sure you guys like and subscribe to both channels. And we will be doing a Notre Dame schedule breakdown like this one on both of ours. So make sure you check all that stuff out. And we will see you guys next time.
See ya.